There are letters that are sent to no address, yet they go straight into the reader's heart. In a world where people are becoming increasingly cold to one another, there are still children quietly writing letters to God. Not to ask for toys or dreams of riches, but for something heartbreakingly simple. Please, let someone be with my mom. Today's story is an unexpected journey of a man who once lost everything because of his selfishness, but who finds the true meaning of life, thanks to a small letter from heaven. The letter from heaven, a story not just to hear, but to feel, to remind us that true love sometimes doesn't begin with a promise, but with an apology. Before we step into this story, if you believe there's still room in the world for love, for redemption, and for kindness, please hit the subscribe button on the Heart Glow channel. Each of your subscriptions is like a small candle, adding light so that more human-centered stories like this can be told. Thank you for being here. Now, let us begin the journey. David Taylor, a name that has filled countless pages in financial newspapers, is the perfect embodiment of the American dream. At 38, he is the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar tech empire. Every morning, David wakes up in his Manhattan penthouse, where golden sunlight shines over the luxurious interiors, but never warms his heart. He has it all: rare sports cars, limited edition watches, and a loyal team of employees, but he has also lost it all: youth, love, and human connection. David chose to live like a machine, every minute, every second of his life meticulously planned. He has no family, no close friends. No one truly knows the man behind the polished suit. Every night, as the city lights glow, David sits alone in his towering office, looking down at the sea of glittering people and silently wonders, what have I given up in return? He didn't have an answer. Because he had locked away his memories in a box where all the things that once made him vulnerable were buried. He believed that to succeed, one must never show softness. The Warmth of Childhood PR campaign was an annual charity program sponsored by David's company, but he rarely paid attention to it. To him, it was just part of corporate social responsibility, a piece of brand image, nothing more. That day, his personal assistant, Andrew, walked into the office with a stack of papers and said, "You should take a look at this." David flipped through the letters written by children at the pediatric hospital. Most were cheerful holiday wishes and simple hopes. But then, he paused at one letter, written in shaky handwriting, the ink blurred, perhaps by tears or trembling hands. No one could tell for sure. The words were short, but hit like a punch to the heart. "Dear God, if I can't live anymore, please give my mom a good father." David froze. He stared at the handwriting, trying to understand what kind of child could write such a heartbreaking plea. No request for toys, no wish to live longer, just a plea for someone to stay by his mother's side. Attached to the letter was a small, worn-out photo. In it was a frail little boy, his head bald from chemotherapy, but his eyes sparkled with kindness, and his gentle smile pierced straight through the heart. Maybe just a tactic to provoke emotion and attract donations, David thought. He was no stranger to campaigns that tugged on heartstrings. The media could create any story if it served a purpose. He set the letter aside and returned to checking his emails, but the boy's gaze in that photo, it seemed to stare straight through him. It wasn't a smile of joy, but the quiet smile of someone who knew he was about to leave this world, and still tried to stay gentle, just so others wouldn't be sad. That gaze followed him the rest of the day, and deep into the night. David couldn't sleep. He lay there, staring out the window, the city's darkness casting shadows across his contemplative face, the boy's image, the shaky handwriting, and that selfless prayer for his mother played over and over in his mind. For the first time in years, he felt his heart ache, not from losing a deal or failing at something, but from something small, real, and deeply human. The next morning, David arrived at the office unusually early. He called his assistant in and asked right away, "That letter from yesterday. Have we found the boy who wrote it?" Andrew looked surprised. "Sir, I thought you didn't care." "Now I do," David cut in, his eyes distant, thoughtful. He ordered a full search, find the boy's identity, where he was being treated, who his mother was. At first, the assistant thought it was just a fleeting emotional impulse. But when he saw the determination in David's eyes, he knew this time was different. David didn't quite understand why he was so resolute. But deep inside, he had a strange, persistent feeling, that the boy wasn't a stranger. That the letter was a key. A key to a door he had slammed shut a long time ago. He felt something stirring within him, like a heart that had been frozen was slowly beginning to thaw. After a few days of searching, the information came in. The boy's name was Tommy, and he was being treated at a small pediatric hospital in the suburbs. Without hesitation, David got into his car. He didn't take his driver. He wanted to go alone. The road leading to the hospital wasn't sleek and paved like Manhattan. It was bumpy, full of potholes and gravel. On either side were old houses, scattered convenience stores, and the tired but resilient faces of everyday people. Hope Children's Hospital was modest and worn, no luxurious lobby, no scent of designer cologne, no high heels clicking on marble floors, just children lying quietly on white beds, and nurses rushing around like silent angels. David felt a lump in his throat. He had thought he understood the world, but now, he realized there was another world, quiet and steadfast, where every day was a battle for life. A nurse led him to room 206, the door creaked open gently, and he saw the boy lying on the bed, frail, pale, but scribbling a card with colorful markers. "Are you Tommy?" David asked, his voice soft, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the room. The boy looked up, his big brown eyes filled with curiosity and warmth. "I'm Tommy." "Are you the one God sent?" David stood still. He didn't know whether to smile or cry. In those eyes, he saw a piece of his former self, innocent, pure, and longing to be loved. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. There was no money, no status, no million-dollar contracts, only a man, lost in life, and a child, with a heart more capable of love than most grown-ups could ever understand. David stepped through the hospital room door with a mix of emotions swirling inside him. He didn't understand why he was so nervous. Just as he was about to ask the nurse about Tommy's mother, he saw a familiar figure sitting by the boy's bedside. Long black hair, a thin frame, eyes full of exhaustion yet still gentle, it all hit him like a punch to the chest. "Anna." He whispered silently in his mind. Time seemed to stop. She hadn't changed much, but it was clear life had been far harsher on her since the day he walked away. Memories rushed back like an old film reel, the grassy field behind their university, where they once sat dreaming of the future. And then, the day he left her, chasing his ambition, the day he convinced himself he couldn't take her with him. Now, that same woman was here, caring for the little boy who had written to God. David's heart pounded uncontrollably. A deep, unshakable feeling washed over him. Maybe this wasn't just coincidence. Maybe this was fate. When Anna turned and saw David, her eyes flickered with surprise, but quickly settled into a calm expression. "Hello," she said, softly, but with a noticeable distance. David wanted to say something, but his throat tightened. Anna pulled her shawl around her and stood, as if to maintain a safe distance. "What are you doing here?" she asked. Her voice wasn't angry, but it wasn't welcoming either. David told her about the letter. Anna nodded gently, as if it didn't surprise her. But she offered no further explanation. She simply said that Tommy was her son, and that the boy's father no longer mattered. Each word from Anna was like a tiny blade, not immediately painful, but slowly bleeding David from within. He realized then, she was no longer the naive, fragile girl he once knew. She had become a strong mother, fiercely protecting her child from any harm, even from him, and that made him feel smaller, more insignificant than ever. In the days that followed, David began visiting the hospital more often. He talked with Tommy, brought him small toys, and read books to him when Anna was busy. Anna didn't stop him, but she didn't warm up to him either. She kept her distance, polite but detached, like two strangers who happened to share compassion for the same child. David often wanted to ask, "Is Tommy my son?" But he didn't have the courage. Part of him feared the answer, and part of him feared hurting Anna again. He started remembering the things they once shared, their shared dreams, the silent hand-holding in freezing winter nights, and now, he felt pain. Not just from losing her, but from knowing he was the reason she had to raise this child alone. His feelings weren't just nostalgia. This was an awakening. A painful realization that everything he gave up to succeed were the very things he needed most. Tommy adored David. The boy didn't know the past between the adults, nor did he understand the layered glances exchanged between his mother and the strange man. To Tommy, David was the one who brought the perfect apple pie, the one who patiently listened to his dreams, and the one who didn't flinch at the four in his arm. "You're the angel God sent," Tommy said, eyes bright with wonder. David held back tears. He gently touched the boy's hair. "I'm just an ordinary man, kiddo." "No, I wrote to God. And then you came. That's a miracle." In that moment, David didn't know how to respond. His heart burst quietly. A child facing life and death could still trust, still love. While he, a grown man, had run from love and responsibility for so many years. David felt smaller than ever. One rainy afternoon, Anna left the hospital to buy medication. Tommy was fast asleep. David sat beside him, watching the boy's tiny face, wondering how many of these moments he had already missed. He noticed Anna's familiar fabric bag left slightly open. A small notebook peeked out, brown, its leather edges worn. Curious and anxious, he gently flipped through it. Inside was Anna's handwriting, still soft, but now tinged with sorrow. The entry from Tommy's birth made his heart stop. "Just a few months after he had left her, I thought I'd name him Tommy, even if you never knew he existed." The words forced David to sit down, burying his face in his hands. "He looks just like you. Every time he smiles, I remember the days we used to dream." There was no doubt anymore. Tommy was his son. His flesh and blood. The most precious thing. He once abandoned, David left the hospital that night without a word. He drove through the rain, not knowing where he was going. The city lights blurred past the window like ghosts of his past. He stopped at an old park, where he and Anna used to meet. Memories overwhelmed him, punishing him with the sweetness of what he once had and rejected. David couldn't forgive himself. How could he, a man who chose to leave, who chose ambition over love, now returning when everything was broken? But in the darkness, a voice echoed in his mind, "Dear God, if I can't live anymore, please send my mom a good dad." David broke down. For the first time in years. The tears of a man who always thought himself strong, who believed money could buy everything. He didn't know what to do, but he knew one thing for certain: he couldn't keep running away anymore. ladies and gentlemen, before we continue with the program, we kindly invite you to leave a comment and share your thoughts in the comments section below. If you find the program meaningful, don't hesitate to share it to support the channel and help spread its message to those around you. Wishing you all a truly meaningful listening experience, David couldn't walk away after learning the truth. His heart no longer belonged to luxurious offices or multi-million-dollar deals. Every morning, instead of sitting at a boardroom table, he now showed up at the children's hospital, carrying a box of toys or a comic book. Tommy waited for him with sparkling eyes and a faint, hopeful smile. They would draw, solve puzzles, and sometimes just sit beside each other in silence, a gentle silence that felt as though they had known each other in a previous life. For the first time, David told fairy tales, though his voice was still clumsy. But Tommy giggled and said, "You tell stories better than the TV." David never imagined that caring for a child could warm his heart so much. In the past, sleepless nights were caused by contracts or falling stocks. Now, he stayed up because he couldn't stop thinking about his son's smile. Slowly, David realized he was no longer the same man. He was surprised to find himself willing to sit for hours just to wipe Tommy's hands, fix his blanket, or simply hold his hand while he slept. The things he once considered trivial had become treasures. He was no longer the cold-hearted CEO, but a man rediscovering his soul, little by little, through his son's eyes. One rainy afternoon, as they were coloring together, Tommy suddenly asked, "Do you believe in miracles?" David was stunned. Before he could answer, Tommy continued, in a calm voice that pierced David's heart, "I'm going to have surgery soon. The doctor said it's really hard. But I'm not scared. I just don't want Mom to be sad if I don't come back." It felt like a dagger to David's chest. He tried to smile, pretending everything would be fine, but his hands trembled. Tommy shared that every night, his mom would sit beside him, reading her diary and silently crying while she thought he was asleep. "My mom is very strong, but she's lonely. I want someone to be with her if I can't come back." David swallowed hard, unable to speak. How could such a small child care so much about his mother? Tommy's maturity broke David's heart. A child should never have to think such thoughts. That night, David didn't return to his hotel. He sat alone in the hospital garden, looking up at the sky as the rain gently fell, and for the first time in his life, he prayed. Without telling anyone, David began using his influence to change the hospital. He quietly transferred a large donation to the pediatric department, helping them buy more ventilators, modern hospital beds, and the most advanced heart surgery equipment. When the hospital director asked who the donor was, they received only a small note with the words, "For an angel named Tommy." He hired an interior design team to redecorate the hospital room with bright colors and adorable animal drawings. Tommy's room became the happiest place in the hospital, always filled with flowers, books, and music. No one knew who was behind it all. Only David came every day, still telling stories, still gently wiping Tommy's forehead whenever he had a fever. No longer the cold CEO of the past, David was now the angel uncle in the eyes of the nurses and patients. But he didn't care about fame. He just hoped he could do something to make up for his mistakes, so that the son who had never called him dad could feel even a brief moment of happiness in his short life. At first, Anna kept her distance. It was not easy for her to believe that a man like David could change. But day by day, she quietly observed the way he patiently wiped the smallest stains from Tommy's hands, the way he fumbled over stories but still tried to make Tommy laugh. The way he carefully asked the doctors about every number, every treatment option, as if he wished he could take all the pain on himself. One evening, when Anna returned from her part-time job, she saw David holding Tommy asleep in a chair. The soft yellow light bathed them both, a scene that made her heart ache. This was no longer the cold man who had once left her during the prime of her youth. It was a father, learning to love with everything he had. Anna began to soften. Though she still hadn't told the truth, her eyes no longer held resentment. Only sadness, and a faint glimmer of hope, that perhaps, this late return was the one miracle life had left for them. The night before the surgery, no one could sleep. Anna sat in the hallway, anxious. David stayed in the room, holding Tommy's small hand. The boy slept peacefully. His eyelashes fluttering gently, his face calm like an angel. David gazed at him for a long time, then bent down and whispered, "I'm sorry for not being here sooner." His voice cracked, no one heard him but himself and the silence of the room. A single tear rolled down his cheek, the first tear of a man who once believed he didn't know how to cry. He placed a soft kiss on his son's hand, as if hoping for forgiveness. "You are the most beautiful thing I've ever had," he whispered. Outside, the rain began to fall, gently tapping on the window. In that small room, a heart that had once gone cold was learning to ache again, not for business, not for power, but for a small child, and the second chance that love had given. The next morning, Tommy was wheeled into the operating room. He wore a hospital gown that was far too big and held his favorite teddy bear. Before he left, he turned to David and Anna and gave a bright smile. "Uncle, if I don't come back, please be a good dad to my mom." David froze. He couldn't answer, he could only nod, then rushed to hold the boy's hand. "You will come back. You definitely will." Tommy smiled, "I hope so too, but if not, then promise me." The nurse pushed the stretcher away, and the operating room doors slowly closed. Anna gripped David's hand tightly, her eyes red. And for the first time in his life, David felt afraid of losing someone he hadn't even had the chance to call son. In his hand was the teddy bear Tommy had left behind, a small gift, yet it held a child's faith, love, and a sacred message from the heart of an angel. Time seemed to freeze, every passing second was a struggle within David's soul. He had never known what true helplessness felt like, until today. He slumped over in a cold plastic hospital chair, clutching tightly the teddy bear Tommy had left behind before entering the operating room. The soft toy now seemed to carry the warmth of the child he had yet to fully become a father to. He was no longer the powerful CEO. He was just a terrified father on the verge of losing his son. His phone buzzed non-stop, calls from the company, partners, even the media, but David didn't care. He turned it off. For the first time in his life, he chose silence over the noise of the world. His assistant stood nearby, not daring to speak, clearly seeing David teetering on the edge between collapse and hope. Behind the white doors, the medical team worked tirelessly. Outside, a man prayed like a child for the very first time. He whispered Tommy's name, his dry lips barely moving. "I don't deserve it, but please don't take him from me," the only words he could muster. Each time a nurse walked by, his heart skipped a beat, hoping for good news. But the hallway remained suffocatingly silent. David had never feared a board meeting, never feared a stock crash. But now, he was afraid of losing something money could never buy. The clock on the wall ticked endlessly, each second dragging out like an eternity. David looked at a photo of Tommy on his phone. That gaze, that smile. They couldn't just disappear. Anna had always been a strong woman, but today, outside the operating room, tears streamed down her face. She couldn't hold her usual composure. Her mother's heart felt crushed with every beat. She turned to look at David, the man who once left her behind, now sitting silently, face pale. They said nothing, but their eyes met, full of pain and regret. Anna quietly sat beside him, just close enough to not touch, but not far away either. After a while, her hands began to tremble from the cold and the fear. David noticed, said nothing, but gently inched closer, his hand lightly brushing hers. That touch wasn't romantic, it was an apology. A silent sharing of pain. Anna didn't pull her hand away. She closed her eyes and let it stay, as if in their shared suffering, they found a moment of solace. She recalled the years of raising their child alone, the nights she held Tommy during fevers, and now, the man who abandoned them was here, waiting with her. Her heart may still carry resentment, but as a mother, she knew, the only thing that mattered now was hope for Tommy. Outside, it began to rain softly. Raindrops on the hospital window like quiet tears falling in the hallway. She spoke softly, not looking at David. "She's strong, but this time, I'm really scared." David gently squeezed her hand, not as a lover, but as a father fighting for their child. The operating room doors flew open. A doctor stepped out in light green scrubs, his face drenched in sweat, his eyes heavy. David shot up, his heart nearly stopping. Anna rushed forward, her eyes red with despair. The surgery was successful, the doctor exhaled, then quickly added, "However, her body is very weak. She needs close monitoring. There's still risk of complications." David felt like he was falling from a peak of hope into an abyss of uncertainty. He thanked the doctor again and again. Yet it never felt like enough. Anna burst into tears in his arms. For the first time, she allowed herself to be vulnerable in front of David. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder, and for the first time, understood the meaning of family, not in abundance, but in moments where two people breathe for the same reason. The doctor added that Tommy was being moved to intensive care, and it would take time for her to regain consciousness. "We've done all we can, the rest depends on her strength," he said, his eyes full of sincerity. David and Anna nodded, as if entrusting their whole hearts to a fragile hope. The days following the surgery were heavy and long. Tommy lay still in the ICU. Her shallow breaths audible beneath the oxygen mask. David sat by her bed, eyes sunken, hair disheveled. He didn't leave, not even for a night. Every beep of the heart monitor made his own heart tighten. Tommy remained unconscious. The doctors called it a mild coma, but for David, it was the most terrifying void of his life. One day, Anna brought in a small box, Tommy's most cherished items, a drawing, a few marbles, and a stack of old letters. David opened them, each a letter to God written by Tommy before bed. One read in shaky handwriting, "Dear God, I'm not scared to die. I'm just scared Mommy will be sad." Another made David cry silently, "If I never meet my real dad, please send Mommy a good dad instead." David clenched his fists, trying not to sob in the cold room. He realized he had been absent from every pain his child had endured, even the fragile hopes Tommy had sent to the sky. Each letter felt like a knife cutting deeper into the heart of a man who once believed he had the right to choose. He kissed Tommy's forehead and whispered, "Daddy's here now, son. You won't need to write letters to anyone else." That night, the hospital was as quiet as a different world. Only the sound of the ventilator and the dim light of the bedside lamp remained. David sat there, still in his wrinkled shirt from days without change, his deep eyes fixed on the child's face. He held Tommy's tiny hand, fragile, cold, and weak, but to him, it was a life waiting for salvation. He didn't know if she could hear him, but he had to speak. for the first time in his life, he opened his heart, not to justify, not to beg forgiveness, just to be honest. I loved your mom so much. But I was scared, too ambitious. I left. I chose my career over both of you. His voice cracked, every word caught in his throat. I lived in loneliness for so long without realizing. What I needed wasn't money, but a family. He told her about the sleepless nights, the first time he read her letters, the way her eyes in a photo broke his heart. He held her hand tighter, as if letting go would make her vanish. Tommy, if you wake up, I promise I'll never leave again. I don't deserve it, but I want to be your father, to grow up with you. A tear fell on her hand, blending with all the guilt he had carried through a lifetime. It wasn't just a confession, it was the first step to begin again, from the heart. The next morning, before dawn broke through the misted window, a miracle happened. David had fallen asleep beside the bed, still holding her hand. Suddenly, her little fingers gently squeezed his. At first, he thought he was dreaming, but then it happened again, a faint squeeze, enough to jolt him awake. He raised his head, heart pounding wildly. Tommy slowly opened her eyes, still glazed from medication, but a spark of light peeked through. I'm hungry. Her voice was weak, but to David, it was the most beautiful sound he had ever heard. He broke down in tears like a child, calling for the nurses, the doctors, Anna. They all rushed in. Anna threw her arms around her daughter, tears overflowing. David held Tommy's hand, laughing and crying at once. When she whispered, "Daddy, you promised you won't leave Mommy again, right?" That gentle question echoed like a bell in David's heart. He looked at her, then at Anna, her eyes brimming with tears, not yet speaking. David nodded, slowly, firmly, "I promise. I'll stay. Forever." Tommy closed her eyes, smiling faintly, then drifted back to sleep, this time, a peaceful and safe one, and in the room remained two adults, with hearts broken just enough, to finally begin healing. Starting today, in the days following the surgery, Tommy recovered slowly but steadily. He could sit up, eat porridge, and even laugh a little. Every time David walked into the room, Tommy would lift his hand and call out "Dad" in a weak but bright voice. David always smiled, comforted him, told stories, drew pictures, or simply sat by and watched him sleep. However, there was still a nameless silence between him and Anna. They avoided eye contact for too long and only spoke when necessary. When David made tea, Anna would softly say thank you and then turn away. When David tried to share something cheerful, Anna would just nod, without replying. The love was still there. Neither of them could deny it, but there was also a deep crack between two hearts that had once been broken. Anna was no longer the gentle girl from the past. She was now strong, calm, and guarded. David understood that his return was a double-edged sword, bringing both hope and the stirring of old wounds. He didn't blame her, he just reminded himself to be patient. Tommy often said, "You and Mom are like two old friends who haven't seen each other in a long time." That innocent remark stung David. It was true that they were beside each other, but not truly with each other. Sometimes, love also needs to heal, just like a heart that has just survived a crisis. When Tommy was healthy enough to leave the hospital for a few days, David suggested a short vacation, not to a luxurious hotel or fancy resort, but to a small wooden cabin nestled in the hills. Anna hesitated at first, but Tommy was so excited that she finally nodded. The three of them left the city behind. No machines, no hospitals, no packed schedules, just nature and each other. There, they woke each morning to birdsong, sunlight through wooden windows, and the scent of warm toast. David taught Tommy how to fly a kite, while Anna sat knitting on the porch. The three of them lit a campfire to roast corn, told ghost stories, and laughed under the night sky. Tommy whispered. To his mother, "This feels like a movie. This is our home, right, Mom?" Anna looked at him, then quietly glanced at David, her heart stirred. That scene, simple yet peaceful, reminded her of a dream she had once buried deep. For the first time in his life, David wasn't thinking about emails or meetings. He only thought about how to make this moment last a little longer. That night, Tommy fell asleep between the two adults, holding both their hands. David turned to Anna and whispered, "Thank you for letting me have today." Anna didn't reply, but her eyes softened, as if the wound was beginning to close. On the third night in the countryside, a light rain fell, and wind rustled through the window frame. Tommy was fast asleep, hugging his teddy bear tightly, while David and Anna sat on the porch under the dim yellow light. They were silent for a long time. The rain drummed gently on the metal roof, like the soft heartbeat of a once broken heart. Finally, Anna spoke first. "Did you know? In the early years, every time I saw someone who looked like you on the street, I'd turn around?" David gripped the armrest slightly, saying nothing. "I used to write hundreds of letters in my head, wishing you'd come back, explain something, apologize. But no one ever came." She looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. "Tommy helped me keep going. Thanks to him, I learned how to be a mother and to be strong, but also because of him, I didn't dare trust anyone anymore, not even you." David's voice caught. "I understand. I didn't come back expecting instant forgiveness. I just want to start again, if you'll let me." Anna looked at him, her tired eyes still full of light. "I don't hate you, David. But I'm afraid." Her voice faltered. "I'm afraid Tommy will be abandoned again. I couldn't survive it a second time." David was silent. He didn't argue. Didn't apologize. He only said softly, "This time, I won't leave. If it takes 10 years to prove it, I'll stay 10 years. The wind still blew, the rain still fell, but in their hearts, something began to thaw, like ice under the first spring sun. On the last day of the trip, the sky was painted gold by the warm sunset. David led Anna to a small hill where they had once watched stars together more than a decade ago, back when they were students. Tommy stayed at the cabin with a kind neighbor, leaving the moment to just the two of them. The wind was gentle, wild grasses swayed, and the fading sunlight made Anna's hair glow like honey. David pulled a small item from his pocket, wrapped in an old handkerchief. He unfolded it to reveal a simple rope bracelet, a keepsake they had once worn as a pair during college. "I know a ring can't change the past. But I hope this bracelet can help us begin again." Anna looked at the gift, her heart racing. Old memories came flooding back like a slow-motion film, filled with happiness, arguments, tears. David knelt down, not proudly, not dramatically, just a man trying to make right what he once did wrong. "I can't promise to make you laugh every day, but I promise I'll never walk away again. Please, give me a chance." The wind seemed to stop, time seemed to freeze in that moment. Anna lowered her gaze, her eyes brimming with tears. She gently touched the bracelet, then whispered, "I've waited a long time for this." But then she looked up, her gaze firm. "I can't accept it, not yet." David froze for a second, but he wasn't disappointed. He nodded, as if he had already expected it. True love isn't about words or rituals. It's about patience and walking through each day together. Even after that gentle refusal, the warmth between them remained. No one was hurt, no one turned away. Anna sat down beside David, and the two of them watched the sunset in silence for a long while. "I didn't say no," she whispered. "I just want to see if you can truly be the person Tommy can call Dad." not just for a week or a month. David nodded, his eyes not sad, but lighter, as if her words had opened a door. I won't make promises anymore, he said. I'll just live the way you need to see. Anna smiled faintly, resting her head on his shoulder for a brief moment, but long enough to make David's heart ache with emotion. That night, they didn't talk about the past anymore. They talked about the future, about simple things like breakfast, school days, and ordinary moments with their child. Tommy, listening nearby, exclaimed, "You and Mom are like a fairy tale." Anna smiled, looked at her son, then at David. Fairy tales take time to reach a happy ending. David squeezed Tommy's hand and replied softly, "And this time, I won't let the story end halfway." Love, once broken, needs to be rebuilt through action. Anna didn't need candlelit dinners, big bouquets, or long letters. She just needed David to stay, truly stay, each day, in the little things, like taking Tommy to school or doing the dishes. And David understood, this was the final test, and the only chance he couldn't afford to lose. After the trip, David restructured his entire life. He transferred most of his responsibilities at the company to his executive team, keeping only an advisory role. Then he rented a modest apartment near the hospital where Tommy had regular checkups, cozy, but not lavish. Every morning, David prepared breakfast himself, then took Tommy to school in an old, beat-up car. He no longer wore his luxury watch. Instead, he wore the simple rope bracelet he had once given Anna. While Tommy was at school, David volunteered at the hospital, not as a CEO, but simply as Uncle David. He helped clean up, read stories to sick children, organized small fundraising events. Every time he returned home, he'd stop by to buy Tommy a treat, ice cream or comic books. Anna saw his changes. He was no longer the cold man she once knew. Tommy gradually began calling him Dad naturally and freely. As if there had never been any distance. In the afternoons, the three of them would stroll around the park, eat sandwiches, and talk about little things. David didn't need anyone's approval. He didn't need the past to be erased. All he needed was the present, with Tommy's laughter, Anna's peace, and a life lived true to his heart, because in the end, he realized, family doesn't have to be made of shared blood, it just needs love that is full and genuine. Spring breeze gently swept through the window, carrying with it the bright laughter of Tommy, the boy who once lay motionless in a hospital bed, now running and jumping like any other child. A year had passed since that life-changing surgery, and Tommy's health had miraculously recovered, like a blessing from above. On a fresh morning, he sat at his little desk, pen in hand, carefully writing every word in a new letter, again addressed to God. Gone were the shaky lines from the past. Now, each word was filled with faith. Dear God, thank you for listening. My dad came back. My mom is no longer alone. And me. I'm still alive to love them. Tommy folded the letter gently and placed it into the small wooden box he had always kept like a treasure. When David read those innocent words again, he stood frozen, eyes stinging. He had never imagined that a simple letter from a child could change his entire life. The sea was still the same, endlessly blue, calm, and vast. But the people standing before it had changed. On that white sandy beach, where David once turned his back and walked away, he now returned, not to give up, but to begin, a simple ceremony, with just the three of them and a few close friends. Anna wore a modest white dress, her hair flowing naturally, her smile glowing with forgiveness. David didn't come with a diamond ring or flowery vows. He simply took her hand, looked into her eyes, and said, I once lost you, but I am no longer the man I used to be. Let me begin again, not because of guilt, but because of love. Tommy was the flower bearer, and also the most beautiful witness to a love reborn. The sound of ocean waves seemed to whisper blessings, and the breeze carried away the silent tears of joy. Gone were the cold penthouses high above the city. David chose a small house by the forest, where there were flower gardens, grassy yards, and sunshine every morning. The home had no luxury furniture, but Tommy's paintings were hung on every wall. Each morning, Anna brewed coffee in a tiny kitchen, David read books, and Tommy played with a little puppy in the yard. They cooked together, gardened together, laughed together, like people who had never weathered any storms. One day, Tommy asked, "Why doesn't our house have an elevator like your old one, Dad?" David chuckled, "Because here, everything we need is within reach, like you and Mom." That house, though small, held an entire universe of love that David had spent his whole life searching for. One day, David stood on a stage at a special charity event. The spotlight no longer made him anxious about his image, it now lit up the belief he carried inside. "I used to live only to make money, but a child once taught me what it means to live with love," he said. The Tommy Foundation was born, not only to cover medical expenses for underprivileged children but also to build playgrounds, offer psychological support to parents, and host wish-listening events for little ones. David invested all the profits from his former company to run the foundation. He no longer wore suits every day but dressed in simple t-shirts, rolled up his sleeves, and traveled with staff to remote hospitals. Each child's smile was a piece of healing for his soul, a thank you sent back to that fateful letter. The media called it a miracle from a child's heart. The story of a wealthy CEO receiving a letter from a dying child, only to discover it was his son, and his journey to make amends, spread like a warm fire in the middle of winter. Millions shared the story, moved by the power of love, forgiveness, and sacrifice. Countless other letters were written to God, filled with the hope of being heard. David didn't like standing in front of cameras, but every time he spoke, he ended with this: "If you've ever done something wrong, don't be afraid to start over. It's never too late to love." His story didn't just comfort the broken-hearted, it made the world believe that with a courageous heart, one could change fate itself. Sunset painted the little garden gold. Tommy sat under an apple tree, holding the old letter, his clear voice echoing in the peaceful space, "Dear God, if I don't survive, please give my mom a good dad." Anna placed her hand over her heart, tears falling without words. David came over, sat beside him, and wrapped his arms around them both. The wind softly brushed through their hair, like a heavenly embrace. David whispered, his voice low and steady, "God didn't send me, son. You did. You saved me." Tommy smiled and wrapped his little arms around his parents. Nothing else was needed. Sometimes, life begins again with something very small, like a childish letter, written with all the love in the world, and so, they lived together. Not as a perfect family, but as a real one. There are stories not just meant to be told, but to be lived, to quietly touch our hearts in the most unexpected moments. A letter from heaven is not a story of loss or redemption. It is the journey of three souls who found each other again through the wreckage, learned to forgive, and loved with all their hearts. It is the story of a father once lost, a mother once lonely, and a child who wrote a letter to God, and that letter stitched back together what once seemed broken beyond repair. Life doesn't hand out second chances easily, but sometimes, one small thing, like the innocent letter of a child, is enough to open a new door. Tommy didn't just write to God, he wrote to the future, to hope, and to the sleeping heart of his father. In their sunny garden, amid warm laughter and quiet evenings together, David, Anna, and Tommy no longer needed to prove they were a family. They were a family, From the moment they chose to forgive and move forward, hand in hand, not by blood, not by past mistakes, but by love, and the daily choice to care, to protect, and to grow together, that letter, from heaven, never flew up to the skies, it flew into hearts, reminding us, when a heart is brave enough to return. Love will always be there, waiting, right where things once fell apart. If this story touched you, even just a little, leave a like or share it with someone who might need a spark of hope today. At Heart Glow, we don't just tell stories, we awaken compassion, heal wounds, and spread the light of humanity into every corner of life. Follow our channel, turn on notifications, and help us write more stories of kindness, where love always wins. Because sometimes, what you share today could be someone's letter from heaven tomorrow. Thank you for listening, thank you for being here.